All right, good morning. I am Julie Lorenz, KDOT Secretary and Chair of the Kansas Infrastructure Hub, which is putting on this summit today. You'll learn more about the Hub in just a little bit, but for now, it means I'm going to be your host for today and tomorrow. We're one of the first states in the nation to convene like this, and when our Hub team put this program together, to be honest, we weren't quite sure what to expect. Would anyone show up? Well, yes, you all have shown up quite well. From Leawood to Liberal, from St. Francis to St. Paul, come one, come all, you have from every region of our great state. More than 500 people are in attendance today, which is kind of weird because we capped it at 500, but we're glad to have all of you. And we have another 200 online. So I'm saying hello to those who are online. Thank you. We're so pleased to have you here. You know, it says, the saying goes something like, 80% of success is showing up, and so we're off to a great start today. The purpose of this summit is to identify how we can maximize infrastructure investments that will be coming to our state thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, as we'll be calling it for short. These dollars offer tremendous opportunity to strengthen Kansas communities for years to come. And Kansas has a proud history of showing the nation how to deliver on federal investments. We opened the nation's first land-grant college, fulfilling Lincoln's promise of providing education to all. And then we showed America that the New Deal youth programs could offer the same work opportunities for boys and girls. And of course, we were the first to open the stretch of interstate, realizing Eisenhower's vision of a strong and prosperous nation. And it's time for us to lead the way again. And I can't think of a better leader to kick us off today than our next speaker. Governor Kelly understands that quality infrastructure is essential for making communities thrive. Thanks to her leadership and the bipartisan support of our legislature, Kansas transportation will be fully funded for the first time in over a decade. Please join me in welcoming Governor Kelly.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is so exciting to see this many people all gathering to give us your input and your talents and your resources to make this work. I need first to thank KDOT Secretary Lorenz for helping to organize this event. The state of Kansas is really well positioned for continued success under your leadership. I also want to welcome everyone to Wichita for this Infrastructure Summit. I understand that it is among the first in the entire nation. That does not surprise me. We Kansans never hesitate to take the initiative on issues that matter. Local governments have always been on the front lines when it comes to addressing infrastructure needs, here in Kansas and elsewhere, and this time is no different. The purpose of today's event is to raise awareness of the funding opportunities available to all of us over the next 5 years. Tomorrow, we're asking you to prioritize where these investments would most benefit our state. While we're grateful for this once-in-a-generation opportunity, we know our needs will always exceed our resources. We must be strategic and work together to deliver as much as we can for Kansas. It's not every day that we get to discuss ways to invest close to $4 billion in our state's infrastructure. That's an unprecedented windfall and promises to make a significant difference in so many substantive ways across our state. This groundbreaking federal bipartisan infrastructure law will improve the lives of millions of Kansans, create a generation of good-paying jobs and economic growth, and prepare our state and our national economy for a rapidly changing future. To give you some perspective on the scope of bill, it features 375 unique programs administered by over a dozen federal agencies that will be funneled through various state and local agencies. Put another way, It is the biggest infrastructure program since the New Deal. That's why I recently formed the Kansas Infrastructure Hub. It's a collaboration of the Kansas Departments of Administration, Agriculture, Commerce, Health and Environment, and Transportation. It also includes the Kansas Water Office, the Kansas Corporation Commission, and we'll have an advisory group made up of public and private sector leaders. The hub, which will be led by Secretary Lorenz, will work to ensure we bring the most money possible to Kansas, and that once we have it, we distribute it effectively and efficiently. Ultimately, it will provide resources and a point of connection for state and local agencies as they track funds and grant opportunities. In Kansas alone, there are over 1,200 state and local bridges and almost 2,000 miles of highway in poor condition. Upwards of 4,000 bridges can't support modern agricultural loads. Since 2011, commute times have increased by nearly 7% in Kansas, and on average, every driver pays over $500 a year in increased costs due to driving on roads in disrepair. The bottom line is that our infrastructure systems were not keeping pace with our expanding needs. Meanwhile, investment in these systems have been declining for decades. These new resources could not have come at a more critical time. None of this would have been possible if a bipartisan group of leaders in Washington didn't put their differences aside to forge an agreement that will benefit our nation for decades to come. Now it's up to us to make sure this money is spent on the right things and in the right way so every Kansan benefits. I'm optimistic that through the collaboration of everyone here today, we're well on our way to success. Part of that optimism stems from the robust infrastructure already in place here in Kansas. It's one of my proudest accomplishments as governor. When I first took office, one of my highest priorities was fixing Kansas' crumbling infrastructure. I worked with legislators from both parties to create a plan that addressed the needs of communities across the state. Our most ambitious accomplishment to date was the 2020 launch of the Eisenhower Transportation Program, or IKE, as we like to call it. For the non-history buffs in the crowd, IKE was the nickname of Kansas' native son, President Dwight David Eisenhower. He was known as the father of the interstate system that transformed the nation back in the 1950s. Our 10-year, $9.9 billion program was designed to carry on President Eisenhower's legacy by preserving what we have and strengthening infrastructure and providing economic growth opportunities throughout our state. You may have encountered some of these projects recently yourselves. So just remember, when you're stuck behind a construction crew, think to yourself, this is progress, and it'll make our state and our communities stronger. Speaking of communities, IKE also expanded partnerships with cities and counties throughout the state. Within 5 months of passage of IKE, during a pandemic, no less, KDOT launched 8 new programs. These programs include Preservation Plus, which has already allocated $17 million in safety enhancements, like intersection improvements, bridge approach replacements, and the construction installation of fiber along 150 miles of priority freight routes. IKE is also supporting the first state-funded competitive broadband grant opportunity to fund projects that facilitate access to high-quality internet service to Kansas homes, businesses, and communities. Launched in 2020, the Broadband Acceleration Grant is a 10-year, $85 million program administered by the newly created Office of Broadband Development within the Department of Commerce. With the infusion of local matching funds, the program has brought the total broadband infrastructure investment in Kansas communities to more than $70 million since 2020. This includes rural areas and small communities, bringing them a new competitive advantage to attract and retain more residents and businesses. But our infrastructure needs extend far beyond making our daily commute easier and Wi-Fi more accessible. It's everything that's essential for our state to support families and businesses, including clean water and a resilient energy grid. It won't surprise you to hear that we're working on those things too. This year, I was proud to propose a budget that fully funds the state water plan for the first time in 15 years. And when it comes to energy, my administration took action to address the immediate needs of our grid and its customers in the aftermath of Winter Storm Uri in 2021. These programs, along with the fact that we fully funded the Kansas Department of Transportation for the first time in well over a decade, are true to President Eisenhower's vision for connecting our nation. Strengthening our state's infrastructure is also crucial to our ongoing efforts to bring new business to Kansas. On that note, my administration recently announced a significant milestone. Since I took office in January 2019, Kansas has attracted over $9 billion in new investments by private sector businesses. That's an achievement that I think we all should celebrate all over the state. Here's what this new $9 billion milestone means for Kansans: more jobs, stronger communities, and greater opportunity. This achievement continues the unprecedented economic development success Kansas has experienced over the last few years. Just last month, Kansas won the prestigious Gold Shovel Award for the second year in a row for excellence in attracting high-value investment projects that create a significant number of new jobs in their communities. In March of this year, Kansas won the 2021 Governor's Cup for being the state with the most new capital investment per capita in the country. We are number one. And in April, I announced my administration's largest economic development investment to date, Scorpion Biologic Services, a $650 million biomanufacturing facility in Manhattan, which will create 500 high-paying jobs within the next 7 years. So many of these successes are directly linked to our strong infrastructure already in place. According to Carol Haddock, a leading expert on the vital link between infrastructure and economic health, the two go hand in hand. Speaking at a congressional hearing on the need to address the deteriorating infrastructure in our country a few years ago, Carol said, "Investment in infrastructure will have a direct positive impact to the economy short-term and long-term through the jobs that are created, through design and construction, but most importantly, through the 75% of the overall cost of infrastructure that goes into long-term operations and maintenance jobs. It is direct, it is tangible, and it is long-lasting." Haddock believes that infrastructure spending enhances the productivity capacity of the economy by helping individuals and businesses produce and sell goods and services more efficiently in the long run. Here in Kansas, we're seeing this unfold in real time. And while there have been some detours along the way, I'm very proud of the progress, productivity, and cooperation that we have seen in our great state. Ultimately, our ability to achieve our state's vast potential depends on seizing opportunities like the bill and investing strategically and for the long term. Once again, I want to thank you all for attending this incredibly important event. There will be a lot of discussion about the best ways to modernize our infrastructure, whether that means replacing lead pipes to ensure safe drinking water, reinforcing bridges, or making our energy grid more resilient. I want you to challenge us. We are here to listen and learn from all of you, and we know we can't get it right without you. We need your input and your collaboration. What I do know is that we have a lot to be proud of, and with the new projects made possible under Bill, we'll continue to lead from the front. That's why I believe our brightest days are ahead of us, and it's all going to start right here, right now, with all of you. Thank you so very much.
Here we go. All right. Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much. All right. So this is the intro session. We're going to get an overview of Bill, and so hang on. We've got a lot to cover. But I'd like to start with recognizing Kansas really is a beautiful place. And it's one of the reasons that President Eisenhower always wanted to be known as first and foremost a Kansans. We really are in a very special place. And from the very beginning, we don't choose the easy route always, but we choose the right route. We came into the Union as a free state. Amelia Earhart was inspired by Kansans to go and fly further and farther than others had before her. And even Ted Lasso. You know, I don't know. I think there was an executive order where whatever, he was proclaimed something. But most importantly, he's a great leader that's not judgmental. So whether it's exactly him or the guy that created him, he also shows us some good ways forward. But this is the thing that is, I think, quite inspiring. What it really means to be a Kansan, and we can all learn from Bob Dole. So as you know, he was wounded in World War II. I mean, so severely that he had to relearn how to dress himself and how to feed himself. And to help pay for his medical bills, his hospital bills, in Russell, Kansas, at the soda shop where he worked before he went off to war, they put out a cigar box to collect money to help defray his hospital bills. And they collected $1,800 to help pay for his hospital bills. And even after he went to Washington, he always kept that cigar box in his desk the entire time to remind himself that he didn't get there under just his own power. He understood the power of having support and friends across this state and across this nation. He never forgot where he came from and how important others are. And so when you look at this picture of two of our favorite sons, President Eisenhower and a younger Bob Dole, what it makes me think of is our state's motto, which is ad astra per aspera, which is to the stars through difficulty. But for the next 2 days, and maybe the next 5 years, I'd like to add a little more to that. So I'd like us to think about to the stars through difficulty, ad astra to the stars simul, to the stars together. That's how we will be most successful across the next 5 years as we deploy these dollars. Simul, working together. So, the purpose of the summit. Why are we here? Well, first, information flow, and you're going to get a lot of it this afternoon and tomorrow. We have lots to share about each of the programs. And to start building connections across the sectors, across the communities. And you see there it says, you know, between needs and resources. And on one hand, our needs are always going to be larger than our money. That's absolutely true. So we need to prioritize our needs. But I'd also say on the resource side, yeah, we'll never have enough money, but man, we can accomplish a lot when we work together. So that's something to challenge ourselves with. And quite frankly, it's to launch the hub so you all can understand what it is and what it isn't. So what it is, it's information exchange. It's understanding what programs are available, what are the rules of the road, how do we connect? That's the connector part. There's a sub-cabinet working group, Secretary Burns-Wallace there in the front row, she's on it. Secretary Beam, I know he's here, he's on it. We have the other secretaries, I mean, and they're here today. We have other secretaries, we have lots of good support from staff. This slide's wrong where we say we have an advisory group. We have a working group that also provides advice. I am so pleased. We've brought lots of smart folks together, and we're going to press their networks into service as well. It's all voluntary, and it's collaborative. It's not a mandate. This hub's not a gatekeeper. So if Allen County says there's an opportunity and we're going to chase it, go. Like, don't wait for approval because there's no approval authority here. Go get to work. But where we can connect folks, that's what we want to do. P.S., we're not a funding source. So if anybody came here today thinking that you were going to get a check from bill funds, I am sorry to tell you there's no check available today. If you want to leave, I won't hold it against you, but I hope you stay. I get it. Like, there's no, oh, P.S., also, the hub isn't really funded. So there's like, it's a lot of hard work, it's voluntary, it's collaborative. We're not schedulers, so again, it goes back to Allen County or anybody else. You don't have to check in with us to schedule a meeting. We're not the approver, but we can be powerful connectors That's the important part of the hub, is sharing information and getting everybody going in the same direction and not stepping on each other's toes and competing a ton for dollars. If we can bundle up projects, work closely with our delegation, that is the power of the collective. So in your packet, you should have an agenda for today, grant opportunities, a long, long list of grant opportunities, some helpful tips on how the summit's going to work, how you can get the most out of your investment of 2 days, along with an explanation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law 101. And we're very thankful to have Florence Chen with us today, who's going to cover some of that. Not quite yet, Florence, but I'm just name checking that you're going to be helping us. All right, so here's the thing. Our home needs some work. We've made progress the last few years, but man, we've got a lot more to go. So in Kansas, we got an infrastructure grade of a C. And here's the thing about an average. It's really kind of lazy thinking, to be honest. Because what it means is you kind of pull down the top and you bring up the bottom to get to an average. And it kind of glosses over some real problems that we see across our state. So this is an example from this just came out in 22, right, in May. Rossville has had 3 boil orders. And I'm not picking on any one community because we can find these examples all across the state. But I just want to highlight some of the problems we have. Wichita, certainly. Water problems galore because you have old pipes. You can see that all across the state. Okay, 2018, this just happens to be a county bridge that needs to be replaced. We have 20,000 county bridges in Kansas. More than half are 100 years old. We know we have work to be done there. Wyandotte County, for example, another big bridge that needs to be replaced. More than $20 billion has had to be spent on extreme weather events from 2010 to 2020. Thanks to Secretary Beam, he's leading a task force on wildfires. We see more and more extreme weather that fuels these calamities that have to be funded so that people can recover and infrastructure can recover. We know broadband needs a ton of work. Concerns about brownouts across our state. Dams in poor condition. Cybersecurity, Secretary Burns-Wallace has been leading those efforts. We haven't conquered the problem, but we've identified it. Here's the thing, opportunities knocking. We now, through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, have some funds available to get to the biggest of our priorities, not all of them, but to the largest. So, lots going on in this slide. It's a $1.2 trillion bill, 120 new programs. So we've got a lot to learn about the new stuff. Got 180, I think, over 180 existing or reinstated programs. Important to understand that under the Biden administration, there are certain things that administration's looking for. So even if they are existing programs, some of the criteria may have been updated, so we need to be aware of that. Here's where the opportunity piece starts to become more clear. About 60% of the funds are going to be directed through federal, state, or local agencies. They're formula funds. These are not recovery funds, they're not ARPA, they're not Spark funds. They go directly through agencies with rules and regs and criteria and things associated with those dollars. Those dollars are going to flow. $3.8 billion's coming to Kansas. We need to figure out how to leverage it to its highest and best use, but recognize there are rules associated with those dollars. On the left side, there's the opportunity knocking part, 40% discretionary grants. That's money we can go get. We're not guaranteed it, but there's a lot of opportunity on that side. And I want to point out, again, not recovery funds. These aren't lose it or use it. These are 5-year funds, so we have a little bit of time to get ourselves organized and think about the best use of those funds. Now, this is the way, for example, it rolls out in Kansas, and I'd be the first to say we could slice and dice the way we've organized these dollars. Lots of ways. This is the way that sort of makes sense to us at the hub in terms of organizing the work and organizing the dollars. An example, wastewater. Since 2016, we've averaged about $13 million in Kansas. Going forward, we think that's going to double for about the next 5 years. So what's the best use of some of those funds? We want your input. You'll see in the panels, we'll be hearing from Fed, state, and local. We want your input on how to best deploy some of those dollars. The summit will be organized this way, so get familiar with these icons. Water and sewer, transportation, broadband, resilience, energy, and cybersecurity. Again, we could have organized them several different ways, but for purposes of today, that's how we've organized these buckets. Now, this is my favorite slide in the whole deck. So, a really good electrician named Thomas Edison said, opportunities missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks like work. And that's the point. There's opportunity galore here, but only if we take advantage of it. Yeah, the 3/8's going to flow, but it's taxpayer money. This isn't money that's just raining down out of the trees. We have a responsibility to use those dollars really wisely because it's our money, it's taxpayer money. We need to make sure that we're getting a lot of good use out of it. And to do that, that takes work. If we want to get additional discretionary funds, that takes work. That's why this advisory group, they're a working group. I love this part. I am super competitive and I want to go get more for our state. And the way we do it is by lining ourselves up to be highly competitive. So, before I hand it over to Florence, one last thing I want to cover is let's get to work. And we should have public sector principles. We want to do it for the people of Kansas, but for God's sakes, let's bring some urgency to it. We can do hard things. I started off this speech by talking about the great achievements in our state's history. But we've got some great examples of things that are going on currently. And let's start here in Wichita, the riverfront. In the 1980s, it was even described by local leaders as a bit desolate. Now it's one of the hottest neighborhoods, not just in Wichita, but across the heartland. Its transformation started when local businesses, believing in that neighborhood, stepped up, and the public sector did too. The U.S. Department of Commerce awarded an economic development grant for Exploration Place to create an outdoor riverfront park, which will provide the community a great gathering place and generate more tourism. And if I had told you, even as recently as last year, that there would be an international competition and Kansas City would be chosen over Denver and Nashville and DC and Orlando, would you have believed it? But that's what happened when Kansas and Missouri worked together to bring the World Cup to Kansas City. And now we will show the world in 26 what we've got to offer. And last but not least, Humboldt, Kansas was listed as one of the 52 places to visit in 2022 by the New York Times. That's amazing for a community under 2,000 people. But here's what's really amazing to me, and this is what gives me the most hope, is that in 2007, it was a lot like many other small towns. Businesses had been boarded up. It was losing population. Streets and sidewalks were crumbling. But somehow, flash forward to today, there are new shops, a boutique hotel, co-working spaces, a bookstore, and more. And the streets and sidewalks have been rebuilt. It took hard work from community members to get there, and it required committing to a bold vision to invest in all key sectors of the community: business and education and government and human services. Generous benefactors also played a role. But today, if you only take one thing from what I said, take this. You don't rebuild a community or solve a major problem in one day. It took years for Humboldt to make this progress, and community members get the credit for their success to one key step. They held a meeting in the community library in 2007 to talk about the future of the town, and they committed on that day to keep at it. So one step, and today's our step. That's what this summit is about. We've got some great work to do together. Ad astra simul. Let's get started. Okay. And so Florence, thank you for being here. She is the Associate Director of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Implementation at the U.S. Department of Transportation. She helps to coordinate DOT's work to deliver programs, projects, and outcomes from this historic legislation. Previously, she worked at Generate Capital, an infrastructure investment firm, and at McKinsey & Company. Florence, thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think I need my slides up too. Oh, that's how it works. All right. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I helped to lead implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law at the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's really inspiring to hear about Kansas's proud history of infrastructure leadership. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that once when I was working on a big project and hit a big milestone in infrastructure, my staff rewarded me with a certificate that was signed by the ghost of Dwight D. Eisenhower. I think it was a joke. But of course, he's a huge inspiration to all of us, and it's really great to be here. So I work closely with the White House and other agencies on delivering programs and projects designed by Congress and the Biden-Harris administration. Today, I'm filling in for our White House Intergovernmental Affairs Office to provide a broad introduction to the components of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. As I said, I'm from the Department of Transportation, so any overview is going to be a bit more transportation-centric. I hope that covers at least 50% of your questions, since transportation is about 50% of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And I'm happy to refer you to other folks to get your questions answered on other infrastructure sectors. So as has been said today a couple times, bill's a $1.2 trillion investment in American infrastructure. President Biden signed this into law in November. What I want to emphasize here is that $1.2 trillion is a lot of money, so there's a lot of potential to transform our infrastructure and our communities. But I want to paraphrase our Deputy Federal Highway Administrator, Stephanie Pollock, in saying the following. Dollars are inputs. Projects are outputs. Jobs, economic growth, more prosperous communities, those are outcomes. So the dollars are only the start. In order to go from this lot of money right here to a lot of projects and better lives, we need your leadership, because it is you, the state, and the local governments that will be actually building the vast majority of the projects. And that's especially true because a lot of the money going out the door is the formula money that we're allocating to the states directly. And you'll see here we've worked really hard in the last few months to start making a lot of that funding available. So quick introduction to what the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law actually does. First, it delivers clean water to all American families and eliminates the nation's lead service lines. It will invest $55 billion to expand access to clean drinking water for households, businesses, schools, and child care centers, and will eliminate lead service pipes. Second, ensuring every American has access to reliable high-speed internet. We've heard that that is a really big need here in Kansas, especially rural communities throughout the country. And so the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law will deliver $65 billion to ensure that every American has access to reliable high-speed internet. Next, one of our favorite parts here at DOT, repairing and rebuilding our roads and bridges. You've heard today from Governor Kelly on the costs and time and money from roads and bridges in disrepair. And so this legislation is going to reauthorize our surface transportation programs for 5 years and will invest $110 billion in additional funding to repair roads and bridges and support major infrastructure projects. Next, improving transportation options for millions of Americans with public transit investments. Our public transit infrastructure is frankly very inadequate. Multi-billion-dollar repair backlog, 24,000 buses, 5,000 rail cars, 200 stations, thousands of miles of tracks and signals and power systems in need of replacement. And so this legislation includes $39 billion of new spending to modernize transit and to continue existing transit programs for 5 years. In total, this new investments in the reauthorization is going to be $90 billion in guaranteed funding for public transit over the next 5 years. That's the largest federal investment in public transit in history. And next, upgrading our nation's airports and ports to strengthen our supply chains. This will improve U.S. competitiveness, create more and better jobs at these hubs, and reduce emissions. The U.S. built modern aviation, but our airports lag far behind our competitors. In fact, a lot of the building of modern aviation we know is happening right here in Kansas. According to some rankings, though, no U.S. airport ranks in the top 25 of airports worldwide. Our ports and waterways need repair and reimagination too. So this legislation invests $17 billion in port infrastructure and waterways and $25 billion in airports to address repairs and maintenance backlogs. Next, one thing we're really proud of again at DOT, and one thing that President Biden and Secretary Buttigieg are very proud of, is making the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. As we know, U.S. passenger rail does lag behind the rest of the world in reliability, speed, and coverage, whereas China already has 22,000 miles of high-speed rail and is planning to double that by 2035. I'm Chinese American. I'm proud to be American, and I don't like losing to the Chinese. And so I think that right now, that this is really our moment right here to make rail play a central role in our transportation and economic future. So that's why we're making a $66 billion investment in additional rail funding. Next, I think one thing that's really top of mind for a lot of folks, because it's the new program, building a national network of electric vehicle chargers. And so the legislation is going to invest $7.5 billion to build out a national network of EV chargers, provide funding for deployment of EV chargers along highway corridors to facilitate long-distance travel, and when the communities provide convenient charging where people live, work, and shop. And it's going to support the president's goal, that's been his goal, since the start of his presidential campaign, which is building a nationwide network of 500,000 EV chargers by 2030. Next, upgrading power infrastructure. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is going to invest more than $65 billion, including the largest investment in clean energy transmission and grid in American history, that will upgrade our power infrastructure, build thousands of miles of new transmission lines, and facilitate expansion of renewables and clean energy while lowering costs. Next here, making our infrastructure resilient. You've heard a lot about the need for this. I think we've all seen the increases in floods, in heat, in extreme weather events. Last year alone, the U.S. faced 22 extreme weather and climate-related disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each. That was a cumulative price tag of nearly $100 billion. And so that's why resilience in infrastructure is so, so important, and why this bill is making an investment of over $50 billion to protect against extreme weather. And lastly here, delivering the largest investment in tackling legacy pollution in American history by cleaning up Superfund and brownfield sites, claiming abandoned mines, and capping orphan oil and gas wells. In thousands of urban and rural communities across the country, we see hundreds of thousands of former industrial and energy sites that are now idle, sources of blight, sources of pollution. This bill is investing $21 billion to clean up Superfund and brownfield sites, reclaim abandoned mine lands, cap orphaned oil and gas wells. So that's a quick overview of what the bill is actually going to do for this country, and a lot of that money, as you heard today, is going to be coming to Kansas. The bill will require a lot of coordination. So first, you'll see here a lot of different offices in the White House will contribute to outreach, engagement, policy, delivery. You don't have to remember any of those. I don't remember all of those usually, but just know that the White House is very, very involved in this. Second, bill involves a lot of federal departments and agencies. So most of the money here is going through our department, the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Department of Interior, and the Environmental Protection Agency. The third piece here is, of course, you, the state and local and tribal governments who are assessing the needs of building the projects and delivering change in our communities. And fourth, there's everyone else who's working on the law, from Congress to the private sector to unions, nonprofits, and advocates who can be a huge resource. President Biden has laid out 6 implementation priorities for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in an executive order. First, spending public dollars wisely and avoiding fraud, waste, and abuse. Second, investing in our economic competitiveness and American manufacturing. Third, creating jobs with good wages and benefits and the choice to join a union. Fourth, ensuring that we are offering equal opportunities and access to everywhere in our country, urban and rural, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, the South, especially the communities that have historically struggled to get the federal government to pay attention to them. Next, making sure, again, we're prepared for the increases in extreme weather events and natural disasters, which we're seeing more of every year, and coordinating among all stakeholders. In the afternoon transportation session, I'm going to get into more detail on what 3, 4, and 5, good jobs, equity, and climate resilience mean for when you are applying for discretionary grants. At a high level now, I'm just going to say, please keep these principles in mind as you're thinking about what projects and needs to prioritize, because they are really guiding how we're making decisions on how we're investing the federal money. One resource I want to draw your attention to learn more about the bill is that bill.gov. You'll see that right there in the red text. You'll find a guidebook there, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Guidebook. It's really long. Don't try to read all of it. I haven't read all of it, but what you will see there is that it actually lays out every single program in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's organized by type of infrastructure. It tells you what that program does. It tells you who can apply, who is eligible, what dates you need to look out for. And so I really encourage people to take a look at that resource because it's a one-stop shop to learn about what programs there are that could work for you. Now I want to dive a little bit deeper into DOT. As you see here, DOT has around half of the bill money, $660 billion. Federal highways alone has a quarter of the bill money, and there are substantial investments in transit and rail as well. So here's a list of some of the competitive grant programs for local governments, and these are ones that you need to apply to. And again, we'll talk more about that this afternoon. The Safe Streets for All, it's going to provide funding directly to and exclusively for local governments to support their efforts to advance Vision Zero plans and other complete streets improvements to reduce crashes and fatalities. Again, states can't even apply for this, but I know that Secretary Lorenz is really excited about it and is plans to support your applications to that. So we'll talk more about this afternoon, but really exciting program. Applications open right now. Another program, applications are open right now, the Bridge Investment Program. It is what it sounds like, providing financial assistance to replacing, rehabilitating, preserving, or protecting existing bridges. Railroad crossing elimination, supporting elimination of highway, railway grade crossings for the simultaneous benefit of safety and improved movement of freight and other rail operations. Reconnecting Communities, really exciting program. We just launched it on June 30th. First ever program to reconnect communities divided by transportation infrastructure. Dedicated funding for state, local, MPO, and tribal governments for the planning, design, demolition, and reconstruction of street grids, parks, or other infrastructure. The Culvert Program, this is going to support improvements for local fish habitats and infrastructure to facilitate passage between fresh and saltwater habitats. Healthy Streets will provide funding to projects that mitigate urban heat islands and improve air quality through modern paving methods and materials. That long thing right there, just call it PROTECT. That's all you need to remember, PROTECT. It's going to support projects that improve the resilience of transportation infrastructure with set-asides for planning grants, evacuation routes, and at-risk infrastructure. The Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program that will provide financial assistance to projects that reduce the number of wildlife vehicle collisions through improved habitat connectivity. The Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program, that one is closed for this year, but I encourage you still to learn about it and to think about applying next year because I think it will be a really great fit for a lot of the communities here. So that's going to improve and expand surface transportation infrastructure in rural areas. Mega projects, again, closed for this year, but something to think about for next year. It's supposed to be supporting basically larger scale projects that will otherwise be unachievable without assistance. And then here, the second to last one, charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grants up to $2.5 billion. So this is a really exciting one because this is actually where you, the communities, will be able to apply for funding for EV charging infrastructure. And lastly, the Strengthening Mobility, Revolutionizing Transportation grants. And looking at the questions that folks submitted for the summit, I learned about technology, deployment technology, modernization is a really big issue on folks' minds. And so what I would encourage you is to look at this program. Applications are not open yet, but there'll be more information about this coming in the summer, and then applications will open in the fall. And so what this is supposed to do is help fund demonstration projects that improve transportation safety and efficiency by developing innovative solutions to a variety of challenges like reducing congestion and helping first responders to assist to public safety. So what this is really here to do is to help you integrate technology into your transportation systems and solutions. And so we'd really encourage you to look at that in September when it comes out. The bill also expands existing grant and financing programs to provide funding to local governments. So just to give you a couple examples here, RAISE. RAISE used to be called Tiger. RAISE used to be called BUILD, so you probably knew it by other names, but now it's called RAISE. It's that same flexible grant program that grew a lot under Bill and that has already funded many projects in Kansas and we hope can fund many more. Infra, similar program to RAISE, but really more focused on freight infrastructure, projects of regional and national significance, also got expanded under Bill. And lastly, TIFIA and RIF. So those are loan programs that can fund a wide variety of transportation and transit-oriented development projects. They're run out of our Build America Bureau, which is a really, really great resource for communities. The Build America Bureau can offer you just a lot of advice, a lot of technical assistance. They're very used to working closely one-on-one with communities, and so would also encourage you to look at that. A couple other pieces as well in terms of changes, expanded eligibilities, increased funding. I want to highlight that in the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, the local governments will see a 24% increase in funding, receiving almost $40 billion in suballocations over 5 years. And the bill also adds eligibilities for STBG, including construction of wildlife crossing structures, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, as well as installation and deployment of intelligent transportation systems and projects that facilitate intermodal connections. So again, what you're seeing here is that we're really trying to expand eligibilities for us to deploy the technologies of the future. And last, the carbon reduction program. So the bill creates a new formula program to reduce transportation-related emissions, which also includes local suballocation consistent with STBG and has a 65% suballocation to states. So in terms of the different roles that we're playing here today in this room, as the federal government, we're of course administering the formula and discretionary grant programs, and we're trying to do a couple things to make life easier for you. First, we are trying to streamline application processes for discretionary grants by combining applications. Second, we're exploring ways to expand our technical assistance capacity to offer project sponsors more frequent and tailored support. The Biden administration has identified at least $700 million in dedicated funding across more than 65 federal technical assistance programs focused on helping communities apply to and deploy federal infrastructure funding. Again, you'll find that link on bill.gov. It's called the Technical Assistance Playbook. It's on bill.gov, and you'll be able to look at what those programs are that are specifically supposed to help you apply for funding and then get your projects built. And lastly, we're trying to expedite project delivery. One example of that is our permitting action plan, which is supposed to help streamline permitting through coordination, through clearer timeline goals and tracking key project information, and through early engagement. What the state is doing here is, of course, deploying your formula funding to maximize impacts, applying for and supporting local applications, do the discretionary programs, delivering projects individually, and working with the federal government, local governments to remove barriers to project delivery systematically. And then as the local governments here in this room, what we expect you to do is to tell us what you need, apply for the grants, and deliver those projects. So here are some technical assistance resources at DOT. I won't go through all of them, but I want to highlight two here in particular. So the first is DOT Navigator, right here at the bottom of the page. That's at transportation.gov/DOT-Navigator. This is a one-stop shop website at DOT to help you find federal funding and get your questions answered. You can learn more about how to apply to grants there, find resources and funding programs, get more information on different infrastructure law programs. And when you find the program that meets your needs, you can usually find webinars, Q&A sessions, specific staff contact information that will answer your more specific questions. The second one I want to highlight here is at the bottom of that column over there, which is the Local Technical Assistance Program. So the Local Technical Assistance Program supports local and rural road agencies by providing training, technical assistance, and technology transfer services to help them manage and maintain roadway systems. So what our LTAP Center here in Kansas is doing, working with KDOT and our division, is actually offering trainings on federal funding requirements. So if you have no idea what it means to have federal money, if you have no idea what a federal grant looks like, I really encourage you to talk to KDOT for more information. I also just want to highlight here, our Federal Highway Division is represented today. Rick, if you want to raise your hand. Rick Backlund, I think many of you know him. He is your expert on bill and federal programs, your go-to here on the ground, and very much plugged into bill, talks a lot to us here, us in Washington, and really can be a good source of information for you. So I guess what I want to say at the end is that we want to serve you here. We want this bill to be most helpful to you. I know a lot about the bill. I don't know as much about Kansas as you guys. I don't know as much about what you need in your individual communities, but that's what I want to do here is I want to learn about that. I want to learn about the projects, learn about the needs, and how we at USDOT can meet them. So I'm really excited for your feedback, your questions. Please come talk to me. I'll be here the next 2 days and really want to make sure that we can take back to Washington your concerns and make this bill work for you. Thank you.
Are you okay for some questions? Okay. So we have a little bit of time available if anybody has a couple of questions for Florence, and then we'll kind of proceed into the next portion. But if there are any questions, we've got some roving mics. Anybody have a question? Okay, over here.
Many people find that pursuing federal grants is an arduous task, and there's not exactly a lot of how-tos to do that. But to give us an example, what is the time frame of actually when you do submit the application for it to actually be funded? Because often people feel it's like a 2-3 year process. So can you kind of break down what does it look like from step A to step Z, what it takes to find the grant, fund it, and just to complete the process? And then DOT Navigator, is that where you go to learn how to apply for grants, or is there another resource for that as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so maybe I can give an example by, I'll give you a specific example, which is the Rural Surface Transportation Grants for this year. So in terms of what happens, right, the first thing that happens is that we at USDOT release what's called a NOFO, a Notice of Funding Opportunity, and that is our application. That is where we tell you, here's what we are looking for, here's who is eligible, here's the types of projects that we are planning to fund, and then at that point, what you do, you have usually 60 days. Sometimes it's 90 days, sometimes it's 30, but usually it's 60 days to apply. And so to give you the timeline example, right, that came out in about mid-March, and then the application closed in mid-May. So during those 60 days, what happens is we run a lot of webinars, we do a lot of outreach. We basically try to move heaven and earth to get everybody who wants to apply to learn about this program to apply, because you really do need to apply within that application window. Then at the 60-day mark, in this case it was mid-May, that application closes. Then we'll take, let's say, 3 to 4 months to review applications. The reason why we are taking that long right now is because many of these are really new programs, and we need time to set up our internal evaluation processes and make sure we are running a fair and unbiased approach, fair and unbiased selection system. One thing I want to emphasize there is that during that time, we cannot talk to you. This is something that our lawyers remind us of every day, twice on a Tuesday, which is when we are making these selections, that is when we can no longer speak with applicants, because that would unfairly advantage you in a process. So that's around the 4 month, and then so what then happens, the next step is that we announce who wins the awards, and that for rural is coming out in, I would say, I think it's October. So essentially what the timeline you're looking at is if day one is when your application, our application is coming out, then you need to have your application in within about 2 months, and then we get the award announcement out 4 months after that. So I would say that that part is about a 6-month process. But then it doesn't stop there, right? Because when you get the grant, then the next step is to put a grant agreement in place and understand the requirements that we're putting on federal money, which are different from state requirements. And so that part of getting a grant agreement in place can take some more time. Sometimes it can take a couple years. We are working very, very hard to find ways to streamline that process, because we know that when you get that award announced, you need that money and you need to build the project, so we don't want to be delaying you. So I want to be transparent that we don't always know how long that process will take, because it is tailored to individual projects, but we want to really be streamlining it, and we're working really hard across federal highways, across DOT, to make sure we're doing that. But I think that what I would say is, like, the most important takeaway is that the individual state, the first initial stage from applying to getting the award is 6 months. And then the second question you have is on DOT Navigator. Yes, if you go to DOT Navigator, you're going to see a link on the side, the left-hand side, that talks about applying for grants at USDOT, and it actually will walk you through. First, you need to register at this website. Then you need to register for an account at this website. And then when you register for an account, then you can submit an application here. And so yes, I would direct you to DOT Navigator to take that first step. Yeah.
Thank you. For the Safe Streets for All program at year one, it seems to be heavy in the technical assistance and getting the studies done, and years 2 through 5 would be more capital. What's the protections in the program to keep that first year where the entire country's jockeying for professional engineering services to put studies together to, one, make sure there's enough capacity to do all those studies, and two, that the pricing of those studies doesn't end up becoming subject to supply and demand issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think what I'll say is that we at USDOT don't have the silver bullet solution to that. I think this gets to a bigger challenge that we know that we have to work together to face, which is a workforce bottleneck, right? Which is that there's a lot more demand for engineering, for consulting, for construction. I think many of you have seen in your communities that it's harder and harder to hire people for these projects, and it's harder and harder to hire people to give advice on applications, and that is not something that, you know, we at USDOT can solve on our own. What I will say here, right, is that we view this as a long-term challenge. We know that in the first year there's going to be some bottlenecks that we can't solve by waving a magic wand. That in order to build up a workforce that will be able to provide the professional services, the expertise to serve your local governments, your communities, it isn't something that we can create out of thin air in, you know, the next 3 months before the applications are due. And so what we are doing at DOT is we are working with unions, we're working with the private sector, we're working with the Department of Labor to determine what are the most pressing workforce bottlenecks and what we can do in partnership with states, with community colleges, with the private sector to train more people to enter that sector. And I think it's good to know that this is a bottleneck that you're particularly concerned about. But what I will say is that training and that increase in workforce will take time. It may not happen the next couple weeks. It may be a question of a few years. But as the Secretary always says, this is a 5-year bill. And so we don't need everyone to have the answer to everything this first year. We don't think that everything is going to be perfect this first year. This year is really about learning, figuring out what the needs are, and then putting together the networks and the systems to solve them over the next 5 years.
Hi, thank you. Ethan Kaplan with Ideatech Telecom. Shameless plug. But I'll just say, you had mentioned having a discussion about some preferential parts of an application during your workshop. And I'm wondering, is that going to be something where the private sector, we saw some of the private sectors and the, working with governments, is that something that you're going to be talking about? Is there going to be preferential application treatment for when private entities will partner with government, or private entities partner with other private entities, or how will that be looked upon? Yeah,
I think preferential treatment might be too strong of a word, but what I will say is that one of the application selection factors that really matters to us is project delivery. Your ability to actually get a project done based on how ready you are, based on your track record, based on who else you're working with. What we found is that projects that partner, projects that really have strong support from the private sector, from the state, from other local governments nearby, are those that are most likely to actually be delivered on time and on budget. And so what I would really encourage you to do, thinking about from a private sector perspective, is determine how you can help communities to really demonstrate that they are ready to deliver that project and that you have the resources to help them deliver that project through, the contracts and agreements that you put in place. The other thing I want to say about project delivery, which I think is really important here, is that yes, when you read that application for project delivery, you'll see that one of the things we're looking for is track record. I know that many of you in this room have never delivered a federal project, and I want to say that is okay. Again, that is okay. We are not here to just give grants to the big cities, the New Yorks and the San Franciscos who've done, hundreds of discretionary grants before. This bill really, really is an opportunity to provide money to people who've never seen federal money before and who really, really need it. And so if you can't demonstrate it through track record, again, you'll see in the application that like we want to see that you have a plan and we want to see that you have partnerships. We want to see you've thought about contingencies. Just because you haven't done it before doesn't mean you can't do it, and we believe that you can.
Yeah, question about a lot of the grants that the Department of Transportation has require a benefit cost analysis. And I'm the grants administrator for the city of Topeka, so like this is what I do every day. But what other resources are there out there for the benefit cost analysis? Because they are super huge and super complicated. And I'm the administrator for grants, and I think they're kind of they're pretty cumbersome. So what resources are out there for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So DOT Navigator actually has a simple breakdown of what a benefit cost analysis actually means. So I would start by just looking at that because it's easier than the 46-page benefit cost analysis document that I've read and don't quite understand all of it either. So I would start with DOT Navigator, and then what I would do is reach out to our chief economist's office because they are the folks who are actually trying to revise and reform that process right now and think about how they can make it easier, especially for smaller communities who've never done this before. And so start with DOT Navigator, talk to our chief economist, and know that this is something that's really top of mind. And we just hired more people to centralize technical assistance throughout the department, and benefit cost analysis is top of mind for them. So if you keep just checking DOT Navigator, we'll actually come out with more resources on this as well because we know it's a priority.
Julian Gonzalez from the Procurement Technical Assistance Center here at WSU. One of our jobs is to assist small businesses to contract with the government. We are federal funded. And one of the questions that we get usually from our businesses is what is the component of solicitations or opportunities that are going to be specific targeted for minority-owned business that are already or are in the process of certification by SBA. So I don't know if you have any specific goals to meet with the bill, but it will be interesting for us to know that too. Thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of specific goals, what we have said publicly is that first, in terms of direct contract dollars, we want to make sure that 20% of those at least are going to small and disadvantaged businesses by 2025, but that's direct spend that DOT is spending. Then most of the bill is actually money that DOT is providing to states, providing to locals we've talked about. And what I want to say here is that this is also a huge priority. While we don't have a direct goal, we are making this a big priority from the secretary on down. The resource I would direct you to there is our Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, or OSDBU, which has really been energized and revitalized under this administration. And so first, OSDBU actually has regional centers, the same as DOT, and OSDBU's regional center here in the central region is in Arkansas. I can send you a link that they're very easy to contact, where they can provide technical assistance, they can provide trainings, they can provide ways to connect you to prime contractors. This is a big priority, and we have a resource dedicated for this, so I'm happy to share more information with you on that.
Thanks for the comments, Florence. Very good. Matt Voles with HDR. I will put a plug in for a grant writing workshop they're hosting here tomorrow. And so if anyone wants to find about Grant Writing 101, some tips and tricks, I know people are going to be talking about that tomorrow. Question for obligation. This might be a question for Rick, but what happens if money's been obligated for a project already and then it wins a grant? How will states be able to de-obligate, if you will, once they've already obligated funds?
I don't know if Rick, if you want to take that, but I also can too. But you go ahead and then I can add. You should come up on stage. Yeah.
Yeah, and this will be our last question.
Sure, and thanks for the question. And actually, I won't name another entity that had received an award, and actually they thought they were going to receive more. Work with our office. We're happy to talk about that and figure out the de-obligation steps and what needs to be done, and that's something we'll work very closely with the Office of the Secretary on. But it's not the first time we've had an issue like this, so hopefully that helps.
All right, I think we're out of time here. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Florence. right, so as we can see, there's so much to understand and so much to cover with this bill. It's such a breadth, the breadth and depth of it. So I want to kind of lay out what the next day and a half are going to look like. This afternoon, when you come back from lunch, you will have your choice of 2 panels. The intention is to look at, you'll recall I talked about those infrastructure buckets, transportation, energy, water. You will choose 2 sessions to go to, and that's an opportunity to understand in more depth about 2 infrastructure components. Tomorrow morning, when we gather, we'll be breaking into groups based on community size, and at that time, you'll talk about all of the infrastructure components from a community size perspective. So maybe a community that has over 100,000 people have different challenges or questions than a community of less than 10,000. So we're going to work based on community size. But we'll talk about all the sectors. And then tomorrow afternoon, we'll put it all together and we'll say, thinking about all the sectors and all the communities of various sizes within a geography, so western Kansas or southeast Kansas, how do we start to put that all together to think about, are there a couple of regional priorities that we want to seek? Are there some grant opportunities that are first and foremost that we want to understand more? Are there some resources we need to work to procure? Quite frankly, when you look across the country, we do see some states that are ahead of us in terms of identifying a handful of state priorities, and they're going hard after those priorities. So an example would be Wyoming. Wyoming has set aside $200 million as matching grant funds, and they're going to target energy. They're pretty coal dependent. They think going forward they want to diversify their energy portfolio. So those are some of the things we can be talking about, whether it's at a state level or a regional level. Now, we are one of the first to do this grassroots approach. I think it's really important because across our counties and our cities, we know that we need to build some capacity for applying for grants. And then I do not at all underestimate the amount of work it takes to administer federal dollars, okay? That's why we pioneered a program called the Federal Fund Swap, which is where, so if Bill Pickert was to get $1 of federal funds, he would give it to me, and I would give him 90 cents of state funds, and he'd be thrilled. Because he's actually making out like a bandit, because it takes me more than $1 to administer federal funds. So I don't underestimate the amount of work that it is, and we have a lot of good opportunity to build capacity across the state. So those are the kinds of conversations that we'll have tomorrow so that we're well situated, not to just get work, not just to get money, but to put it to good use. So this afternoon when you return, you have, again, you get to choose 2 panels. There will be someone to provide a federal perspective on that particular infrastructure bucket. There will be someone there to also talk about the state perspective, kind of the state approach to administering the funds, as well as the overview of state programs. So, for example, Mike Moriarty's back there. He's going to be providing the KDOT perspective. He's going to talk about our approach for Safe Streets for All, which I'm very pleased to talk about the amount of state funds we're going to provide for local match. We'll talk about how we are going to deploy the additional $89 million on the highway side. He'll give you a bit of a preview on what we're doing with the additional 45, or the new 45 for bridges. So that's just an example, but the state agencies will be talking about the either new funds or the additional funds. Then we will have at least one, in some cases 2 stakeholders that will provide some insights into what they see challenges are within that sector. And then very appreciative, our moderators all come from the private sector, and they will both help facilitate the conversation and share good examples from what other states are doing. So a lot of learning opportunities. Moderators will ask each of the panelists at least these 3 questions, because the discussion that we have this afternoon helps seed the discussion tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon around opportunities, barriers, and actions. Certainly they'll ask other questions and there'll be more discussion, but we for sure will cover those from each of the presenters' perspectives. And when we get back together, really hard, we only get 15 minutes for a report back this afternoon, we're going to ask those report back speakers to focus on 2 things. And it really goes back to the Thomas Edison slide. What's the biggest opportunity and where is the most work needed within this particular sector? and not to worry. No good ideas getting left behind. It's not going on the cutting floor. We have note takers in each of the sessions. We will be capturing the conversation in total so that we will be able to wrap that up. We'll take it to the advisory group and figure out. We only have so much time together, so we're really going to try to narrow and focus. But we know there will be a lot of good ideas that the hub will want to explore and to figure out what our charge is, how we can be most efficient with the limited time and resources that we have. I want to point out that all the panels will run twice, except for energy. Energy will only be offered once, and it's at the top, which is probably the 1 o'clock session, but they won't have a second session. So if energy is one of your 2 selections, please go to it at 1 o'clock. I want to say a big thank you, yes, to everybody that's made time today to be here in person, to everyone that's online. I also want to say thank you to our lunch sponsors. We know that the power of networking and having an opportunity to have lunch together and talk is very important. So I want to say thank you to BHC, Burns & McDonnell, GBA, HDR, HNTB, Kirkham Michael Olson, the Missouri-Kansas chapter of ACPA, PEC, and Trans Systems. So with that, I'm pretty sure the next thing I do is say we're running a little ahead of schedule. Excellent. Lunch is already here, so you're going to have a little extra time. So make sure you get to your breakout rooms promptly at 1 o'clock. There is no excuse if you're getting out early to be late to your session. What that means is you're going to go to pick up lunch in room 142. You can eat lunch in room 180, 138. However, no food or drink in here. So, we need to be respectful of our location. Thank you all so much. I can't wait to hear the sessions this afternoon and then tomorrow for all the breakout conversations. Thank you. You can go out those doors and find lunch.